For All the State Jural Assemblies Part 33 The American Civil War by Anna von Reitz. From our discussions we have now fully realized that the constitutions and the federal government arising from these venerable agreements only affected our country's operations in the municipal jurisdiction's realm of commerce, that is, business conducted between two fully incorporated, chartered legal fiction entities. Adoption of the federal, territorial, and municipal constitutions didn't affect our soil jurisdiction estates, doing business as the United States, nor did they impact our land jurisdiction states doing business as the United States of America, but they did change the operations of the States of America, a union of commercial corporations chartered by the states. The impact of the constitutions on the States of America and on the member commercial corporations doing business under names styled like this, the state of Pennsylvania, was dramatic. The most important immediate change was that control of our fledgling navy and our naval operations was ceded to the British King, who was obligated to function as our trustee on the high seas and inland waterways, and to protect our private and international and commercial interests in those venues. Control of our international trade policy was also given away to the King. At least in the realm of commerce, we traded our freedom for safety, though it is doubtful that many Americans realized this at the time. The overall result of adopting the constitutions was to split up the functions originally taken care of by the States of America, and assign some of them to foreign governments to take care of for us. This power-sharing concession was predestined by the treaties and earlier agreements that allowed for the end of the Revolutionary War. In other words, these concessions and promises to share power with the British King and the Holy Roman Empire were obligations our forefathers accepted as part of the peace negotiations, and the constitutions that resulted, federal, territorial, and municipal, were simply the instruments used to implement the pre-existing deal. So, the States of America remained the fundamental federal service provider as we came out of the Constitutional Convention, and as of 1787, the Constitution for the United States of America emerged as the Federal Constitution. That is, this is the Constitution creating the federal branch of the federal government. Though its powers and turf were battered and beaten in this process, the States of America was still a very potent force, with responsibility for the nation's money and many other key services. The loss of control of the naval powers and the loss of control of our international trade policy was grievous, but was deemed necessary at the time. Coming out of the Revolution, we had a huge commercial fleet, but almost no navy. We had lots of raw materials to ship to eager markets in Europe and a need to get paid for them, but our unprotected commercial fleet was being decimated by privateers. Most of the American-based private commercial fleet belonged to two groups: British-American former colonists sailing out of Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Virginia, and Dutch New York and Southern interests derived from the disappeared Dutch East India Fleet that mysteriously vanished circa 1702 and wound up in New York and the Pacific. They were the primary movers insisting on the surrender of our naval powers so that they could continue their commercial shipments unmolested. The rest of the people were tired of war and accepted the new inroads against our sovereignty rather than continue to fight and starve. Still, for many, these losses remained a sore point, and the adoption of the constitutions was by no means unopposed, nor were the losses unforgotten. As the British Parliament began to impose ever more disadvantageous trade policies on the American federal states of states, all commercial corporations with their own axes to grind, tempers flared. Malfeasance by British merchant marine officers known as bar attorneys led to the War of 1812, which was a pushback against unequal trade policies and unfair tariffs and market rigging. In 1819, the States of America responded by toughening already existing constitutional provisions against conflicts of interest and buying of loyalty by foreign powers bestowing foreign titles of nobility on Americans. This was applied to the practice of bestowing the title Esquire on American bar attorneys. Frustrated by our resistance to their interference and manipulation of our commercial interests to our own detriment, the British monarch and the then Pope signed a clandestine treaty known as the Secret Treaty of Verona in 1822, in which they agreed that our American system of government was intrinsically opposed to both feudal monarchies and papal authority. In gross breach of trust, they agreed to secretively undermine our government, a course of action which they have pursued ever since and which has finally led to the present circumstance. This is the big picture, but to further understand, we must necessarily revisit what has euphemistically been called the American Civil War. First, one must ask, what is a civil war as opposed to any other kind of war? Civil equals city equals municipal equals global commercial jurisdiction equals war between persons, not people equals war between commercial corporations. This war, called the American Civil War, was not properly termed a war, but was instead a commercial conflict like the Vietnam conflict, fought by foreign mercenaries on our shores, and by employees and volunteers backing the various federal state-of-state commercial corporations. Those federal states of states that remained loyal to the original Confederation doing business as the States of America represented the North and were called Union troops. Many Americans even at the time mistook which Union they were fighting for and in what context. The federal states of states that broke away from the original Confederation and formed their own version doing business as the Confederate States of America represented the Southern states' commercial corporations, and their troops were called Confederates as a result. The King of England gleefully funded both sides of the conflict, and the separate international city-state of Westminster lost no time setting up effective blockades and conscription services and issued privateer licenses against all our shipping north and south. From the standpoint of the monarchists and the Holy Roman Empire, the object of the American Civil War was to defeat the South and take Southern cotton out of the European markets, permanently end the cost-saving advantages that slavery provided the Southern plantations, and to reduce the Northern states of states to a condition of bankruptcy. They succeeded in all respects. And Americans and America paid for it all. You must remember what we are talking about, a commercial war for markets and profits, waged by commercial corporations that are essentially no different than any other commercial corporation except that they are chartered directly by actual states instead of being chartered secondhand by states of states. The British and French-backed northern states of states resented slavery for profit and market reasons, so they encouraged the abolitionists. Private slavery was already out of fashion in Europe and of no great economic consequence to their domestic markets, except that it gave the American southern states of states a cost advantage in the marketplace, and they competed against British and French cotton plantations established elsewhere in the world. The British and Holy Roman Empire-backed southern states of states favored slavery for profit and market reasons, so they encouraged the pro-slavery plantation owners, many of which produced products other than cotton. Remember that the addictive properties of high-nicotine tobacco were just beginning to be exploited as a de facto drug trade prior to the Civil War, and the squabble over cotton production interfered with tobacco, sugar, rum, molasses, and many other products. Last but not least, this commercial war was a bonanza for the railroads, the arms manufacturers, and the U.S. Armed Forces, especially the British-controlled Navy, which received privateer kickbacks. There had never been a better opportunity for professional soldiers in this country, and men like Ulysses S. Grant and William Tecumseh Sherman made the most of it. So it is not a pretty picture, but it is an accurate one. The members of the original Confederation of Federal States of States doing business as the States of America, all of them commercial corporations chartered by their states, all of them assigned service contracts under the Constitution for the United States of America, took the European bait and went to war with each other. By 1863, the northern states of states were bankrupt. By 1865, the southern states were in ruins and the southern states of states gave up the fight. Since it was not an actual war according to the definition of war, there was never any declaration of war issued by any Congress related to the American Civil War, nor was the surrender of Lee's army at Appomattox a peace treaty. The corporations and those backing them simply decided to stop fighting and went home, leaving the federal government in chaos that has persisted and been capitalized upon until this day. The federal states of states are separate entities, though they were all chartered by the actual states. The Confederation of States founded in 1781 was in ruins. It would require a concerted effort to reconstruct the federal states of states and form new commercial corporations to service their obligations under the Constitution for the United States of America. That job of reconstruction of the federal states of states has never been accomplished, and it can only be done by the actual states and people. So the people must assemble and the states must assemble, and they have to take care of long overdue business. As we shall see, certain parties who owed us better service left us unaware of this urgent necessity and deliberately lulled us into the assumption that the Reconstruction era was long over, and that we had no work to do. Until this long overdue process of reconstruction is undertaken, the entire federal branch of the federal government is out of commission, mothballed, and the assets of the original federal states of states that came through the ruination and bankruptcies have been rolled into land trusts, meaning that these trusts belong to the land jurisdiction states and people. The assets of the state of Maryland and the state of Maine and the state of Pennsylvania, and so on, have been rolled into the Maryland State Land Trust, Maine State Land Trust, Pennsylvania State Land Trust. The actual states and people of this country are being summoned to take action in their own behalf and to reconstruct their federal states of states and to restore the federal government they are owed, all of it, not just the territorial and municipal bits. Please bear in mind and be aware that your actual soil jurisdiction states, DBA the United States, and your land jurisdiction states, DBA the United States of America, and all their member republics and states, have never been involved in any of this commercial uproar. Our only duty and our only failure thus far is to recognize certain semantic deceits, to organize ourselves into competent state jural assemblies, and to recharter our federal states of states to provide the services owed to our states under the Constitution for the United States of America. Please hit subscribe, like, share, embed, and get ready for many more Anna von Reitz videos.